Their routine was a well-choreographed dance, a sequence of small, shared moments that formed the comforting rhythm of their days. Mornings invariably began with Oliver's soft paws kneading her duvet, a gentle, furry alarm clock far more pleasant than any electronic device. Abby would rise, her joints sometimes offering a quiet protest to the new day, and make her way to the kitchen, Oliver trotting faithfully behind, his plumed tail held high in cheerful anticipation. Soon, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee from her trusty Keurig machine would fill the air, mingling with the scent of toasted artisanal bread, a staple from the local Willow Creek bakery. While Abby enjoyed her breakfast, often scrolling through headlines on her iPad or watching the Cardinals and Blue Jays bicker at the bird feeder outside her kitchen window, Oliver would dine on his premium grain-free kibble, crunching with a satisfaction that was almost audible. Evenings were reserved for quiet companionship. Abby might be engrossed in a novel borrowed from the Willow Creek Public Library, a cup of chamomile tea steaming beside her on the end table, while Oliver curled up on the worn, plaid armchair opposite, or sometimes, daringly, on her lap, his weight a comforting, solid pressure. They'd watch the evening news together on the television, or Abby would recount the small events of her day, a chat with Mrs. Gable from next door about the unusually vibrant petunias that year, or the rising price of organic avocados at Freshfields Market, the town's preferred health food store. Oliver, of course, would listen with what Abby liked to interpret as profound understanding, his amber eyes blinking slowly, thoughtfully. He was, in every sense of the word, an easy cat. He was never overly demanding, rarely vocal unless his food bowl had been inexcusably empty for too long, and certainly not prone to any sort of aggressive or overly persistent behavior. He tolerated visitors with a polite, almost regal indifference, clearly preferring the company of his human. He wasn't a lap cat by default, but he enjoyed being close, a furry, comforting presence that emanated warmth and peace. This placid nature, this established baseline of gentle quietude, was precisely what made his sudden and inexplicable change in behavior so utterly baffling, and eventually so deeply alarming to Abby. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly, on a cool Tuesday morning in late October. Abby was seated at her small antique desk in the sunroom, surrounded by her beloved houseplants, paying bills online. Suddenly, she felt a faint, repetitive tapping sensation on the back of her neck, just to the right of her spine. She reached back, swatting idly, assuming it was a stray strand of her silver-gray hair tickling her, or perhaps an adventurous housefly that had found its way indoors during a brief moment. The screen door was ajar, but the sensation persisted, a delicate, rhythmic touch. She turned her head, and there was Oliver, perched precariously on the back of her chair, one paw delicately extended, his gaze fixed on her neck with an intensity she had rarely witnessed in him. "Oliver, what on earth are you doing, you silly boy?" she chuckled, gently pushing his paw away. He blinked at her, his large amber eyes unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he leaned forward and began to lick the exact same spot, his rough tongue surprisingly abrasive against her skin. It wasn't a gentle, affectionate, grooming lick she was accustomed to. This felt more urgent, more focused, almost diagnostic. "Hey, stop that, Oliver, that tickles, and it's a bit odd," Abby said a little more firmly this time, nudging him away with her shoulder. He hopped off the chair with a graceful leap, stretched languidly as if nothing unusual had transpired, and began to groom his own shoulder with meticulous care. Abby shrugged it off as a fleeting feline eccentricity. Cats, she reminded herself, were mysterious creatures, their motivations often opaque to human understanding. But it wasn't a fleeting eccentricity. Later that same day, as she was tending to her late-blooming chrysanthemums in the garden, wearing her favorite wide-brimmed straw hat to shield her face from the surprisingly warm autumn sun, Oliver, who usually preferred to observe her gardening efforts from the cool shade of the porch, approached her. He rubbed against her legs, a common enough greeting, but then he did something unusual. He stood on his hind legs, bracing his front paws against her denim-clad thigh, and stretched his neck up, attempting to reach the same spot on her neck, his little pink nose twitching with an almost comical intensity. He let out a soft, questioning marrow. "Oliver, honestly," she said, a mixture of amusement and perplexity in her voice. "What has gotten into you about my neck?" She bent down to stroke him, but he dodged her hand, his attention still seemingly fixated on that one particular area. This time, a tiny sliver of unease, sharp and unwelcome, began to creep into Abby's mind. It was just so unlike him, so out of character for her usually serene companion. Over the next few days, Oliver's peculiar behavior escalated. The gentle taps became more insistent, sometimes accompanied by a soft but persistent meow, a sound that wasn't his usual "I'm hungry" or "let me out" vocalization. This was different, laced with a strange, almost palpable anxiety. He would follow her around the house, a silent, furry shadow, and whenever she sat down, to read her book, to watch her favorite television programs, to knit the soft blue baby blanket she was making for her grandnephew, he would find a way to position himself behind her. His attempts to reach her neck became more frequent, more determined. The licking, when he managed to make contact, was no longer ignorable. It was focused, almost frantic, his little body tense with an unexplained purpose. Abby began to feel a confusing mixture of annoyance and genuine concern. "Oliver, stop it. You're driving me absolutely mad," she exclaimed one evening, after he'd interrupted her concentration for the 5th time as she tried to balance her budget using her online banking app. He simply looked at her, his amber eyes wide and unblinking, and let out that same worried-sounding meow before trying to bat at her neck again with his paw. She pushed him away, perhaps more forcefully than she intended, and he retreated under the sofa, a place he rarely frequented. A pang of guilt immediately hit Abby. He wasn't being malicious. He was clearly distressed about something. But what could it possibly be? She examined her neck meticulously in the bathroom mirror, tilting her head this way and that, scrutinizing the skin. She saw nothing. No rash, no insect bite, no blemish, no mark of any kind. She felt the area carefully with her fingertips. Just skin, a little loose perhaps, as was natural for her 69 years, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Maybe she'd unknowingly used a new shampoo or a different brand of soap that had a scent that was bothering him. She conscientiously switched back to her old, unscented brands, the ones she'd used for years, but Oliver's strange fixation continued unabated, his attention as unwavering as ever. Her friend, Sarah, with whom she had a standing coffee date every Thursday morning at the Corner Perk, Willow Creek's popular cafe, noticed Abby seemed distracted and unusually quiet. "You all right, Abby? You seem a bit on edge today," Sarah asked, her brow furrowed with genuine concern as she stirred her latte. Abby sighed, swirling the remnants of her own coffee in its oversized mug. "It's Oliver," she confessed, the words tumbling out a rush. "He's been acting so strangely for the past week or so. He keeps pawing and licking the back of my neck. Constantly. It's driving me up the wall, and honestly, Sarah, it's starting to really worry me." Sarah, a pragmatic woman who owned 2 boisterous golden retrievers, chuckled lightly. "Oh, cats. They're such neurotic little things, aren't they? Maybe he just has a new obsession. Remember when my Cooper wouldn't stop chasing shadows for a whole month? He'll probably get bored of it and move on to something else." "I don't know, Sarah," Abby said, shaking her head slowly. "This feels different. He seems genuinely anxious. It's like he's trying to tell me something important." The moment she voiced the words aloud, a shiver traced its way down her spine. Could it be possible? Could Oliver, her gentle, unassuming ginger cat, be trying to communicate something vital, something she couldn't perceive? That night, sleep eluded Abby. Oliver, in a break from his usual habit of sleeping at the foot of the bed, had taken to sleeping on the pillow beside hers. Several times, she woke up to the sensation of his paw gently but persistently patting her neck, his soft purr vibrating with an unusual urgency, a strange resonance she hadn't noticed before. Each time, she would gently move him, her heart aflutter with a confusing concoction of irritation and a burgeoning, inexplicable dread. The area he was so fixated on began to feel tender, not from any internal ailment she could discern, but simply from his constant, unwavering attention. Or was she imagining that too? Her mind playing tricks on her? The following days saw no abatement in Oliver's peculiar behavior. He'd follow her into the bathroom, meowing pitifully if she closed the door, and would immediately try to access her neck the moment she emerged. He'd even jump onto the kitchen counter while she was preparing meals, a previously unheard-of transgression, strictly against house rules, all in an effort to get closer to that specific targeted spot. His usually hearty appetite seemed to diminish slightly, and he spent less time dozing in his favorite sunbeams, his considerable feline energy seemingly channeled into this singular, obsessive mission. Abby started wearing turtlenecks, even though the late October days were still relatively mild. It was a physical barrier, an attempt to reclaim her personal space, and, perhaps, to discourage Oliver from his relentless pursuit. It didn't work. He would simply rub his head insistently against the fabric covering the spot, his meows growing more plaintive, more insistent, tinged with what sounded like sheer frustration. He'd try to burrow his head under the collar, his small body quivering with effort, his frustration palpable. The constant, low-level stress of this unexplained behavior was beginning to take its toll on Abby. She found herself becoming increasingly irritable, not just with Oliver, but with everything and everyone. A wrong number on the telephone made her snap. A delayed grocery delivery from QuickCard Online felt like a personal affront. She knew, deep down, that her beloved cat wasn't trying to annoy her. His actions were too consistent, too focused, too imbued with a strange, almost desperate energy for it to be mere mischief. One afternoon, about 2 weeks into this bizarre and unsettling ordeal, Abby was sitting on her porch swing, a half-finished glass of iced tea sweating condensation onto the small wicker table beside her. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. Oliver was at her feet, looking up at her, his tail twitching rhythmically. He let out a low, guttural meow, a sound she rarely heard from him, then placed his front paws on her lap and stretched, trying once again, with unwavering determination, to reach her neck. This time, instead of pushing him away in exasperation, Abby found herself looking deeply into his wide, golden eyes. And in their depths, she saw not mischief, not a game, but something that looked remarkably like pleading, like a desperate attempt to convey a message she was failing to understand. A memory surfaced, unbidden, from the recesses of her mind. Years ago, she'd read an article tucked away in some forgotten magazine in a doctor's waiting room, perhaps a Reader's Digest or a similar publication. It was about animals being able to detect illnesses in humans, dogs detecting oncoming seizures, or even certain types of cancer through their incredibly acute sense of smell. Could cats possess a similar ability? It seemed far-fetched, the stuff of internet folklore and anecdotal tales. But Oliver's persistence, it was more than just a quirky habit. It was a campaign, relentless and unwavering. She sighed, a wave of profound weariness washing over her. "All right, Oliver," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the creak of the swing. "All right, maybe you're not just being a nuisance. Maybe there's something to this." She reached up and gently touched the back of her neck, the exact spot Oliver had been so diligently, obsessively attending to. This time, perhaps because she was finally paying closer, more focused attention, or perhaps because of Oliver's constant ministrations to the area, she thought she felt something. A tiny, pea-sized lump nestled deep under the skin. It was so small, so subtle, that she could easily have missed it, and probably had countless times before during her routine showers or while dressing. Her breath hitched in her throat. It was probably nothing, she tried to reassure herself. A swollen gland, a benign cyst, a harmless lipoma. She was prone to overthinking things, especially when it came to her health, a common trait as one grew older. But Oliver's unwavering, almost fanatical focus on that exact spot, She tried to dismiss it. It was her imagination, she told herself, fueled by Oliver's odd behavior and perhaps too many late-night internet searches about cats acting strange and unexplained pet behavior. But the seed of doubt, once planted, began to sprout with alarming speed. The next morning, after another night of Oliver's gentle but relentless attention to her neck, Abby made a decision. She picked up the phone and called Dr. Evans, her primary care physician at the Willow Creek Family Clinic. "I know this is going to sound incredibly foolish, Susan," Abby said to the receptionist, a kind woman she'd known for years from her visits to the clinic, "but I'd like to make an appointment. It's about my cat seems to think there's something wrong with the back of my neck." She braced herself for laughter, or at least a bewildered silence, a polite inquiry about her mental state. But Susan, bless her pragmatic heart, simply said, "Mrs. Carter, if something is worrying you, no matter the reason, it's always best to get it checked out. How about Thursday at 10 in the morning?" The days leading up to the appointment were filled with a quiet, gnawing anxiety. Oliver, however, seemed to sense a shift in Abby. While he didn't entirely cease his neck-focused behavior, it seemed to lessen slightly in its frantic intensity, as if he understood, in his own feline way, that she was finally taking action. Or perhaps, Abby thought with a touch of skepticism, she was just projecting her own hopes and interpretations onto him. On Thursday morning, Abby found herself sitting in the familiar, slightly sterile waiting room of the clinic, flipping through an outdated issue of Better Homes and Gardens, without really seeing the vibrant pictures of perfect interiors and blooming gardens. When Dr. Evans called her name, she took a deep, steadying breath and walked into the examination room. Dr. Evans was a calm, reassuring presence, a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and a patient demeanor. Abby had been her patient for nearly 15 years. After the usual pleasantries, the routine blood pressure check, and a quick review of her general health, Abby finally broached the subject, feeling a blush creep up her cheeks despite her resolve. "Doctor," she began, her voice a little hesitant, "this is going to sound very strange, I know, but the real reason I'm here today is, it's because of my cat, Oliver." She explained Oliver's persistent behavior over the past few weeks. The constant pawing, the insistent licking, the anxious meowing, all directed with unwavering precision at that one specific spot on her neck. Dr. Evans listened patiently, her expression thoughtful and unreadable. Abby half expected her to gently suggest a consultation with a good veterinarian for Oliver, or perhaps, more subtly, a psychologist for herself. When Abby finished her unusual account, Dr. Evans smiled gently. "Abby," she said, her voice calm and devoid of any judgment, "I've heard stranger things in my years of practice. Animals, particularly those we share our homes with, have senses and instincts that we are only just beginning to understand. Let's take a look, shall we?" Abby pointed to the spot on her neck that Oliver had been so obsessed with. Dr. Evans's skilled fingers began to palpate the area with professional care. Abby held her breath, her heart thumping against her ribs. The doctor's touch was firm but gentle. After a few moments of careful examination, her brow furrowed slightly. She murmured, pressing a little deeper, her expression growing more serious. "There's a small nodule here. It's quite deep, which is likely why you haven't noticed it before, but it's definitely palpable." Abby's heart sank. A nodule. The word sounded ominous, heavy with unspoken possibilities. "Yes," Dr. Evans said, her voice calm but carrying a new note of seriousness. "It could be any number of things, Abby. A lipoma, which is a benign fatty tumor, a swollen lymph node, perhaps a cyst. But given its location, the fact that it's new to you, and your cat's unusual attention to it, I like to get an ultrasound done as soon as possible, and then likely a biopsy, just to be on the safe side and rule out anything serious." The words ultrasound and biopsy hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Abby's carefully constructed composure. But strangely, alongside the fear, there was also a profound, almost overwhelming sense of gratitude towards her furry, four-legged companion, her dear Oliver. The following week was a blur of medical appointments and anxious waiting. The ultrasound at the local hospital confirmed the presence of a distinct, solid mass, and a few days later, Abby underwent a needle biopsy. The waiting period for the results was agonizing. Each ring of the telephone sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. Oliver, almost as if he understood the gravity of the situation, became incredibly gentle. He still stayed close, often resting his head near her neck when she lay on the sofa reading or watching television. But the frantic pawing and insistent licking had completely stopped. It was replaced by a quiet, comforting presence, his purr a low, steady rumble that seemed to soothe her frayed nerves more effectively than any medication could. Then came the call from Dr. Evans's office. Abby's hand trembled as she picked up the phone, her breath caught in her throat. "Abby," Dr. Evans's voice was gentle but direct. "The biopsy results are back. I need you to come in to discuss them, but I want to tell you now, the tumor is malignant." Malignant. Cancer. The word slammed into Abby with the force of a physical blow. She sank into her kitchen chair, the receiver clutched tightly in her trembling hand, the familiar surroundings of her sunny kitchen seeming to tilt and fade around her. Dr. Evans continued speaking, her voice a distant murmur, talking about oncologists, treatment plans, prognosis. Abby barely registered the words. Her mind was reeling, replaying Oliver's strange, insistent behavior over and over again. The pawing, the licking, the anxious meows. He knew. Somehow, her little ginger cat, her quiet, unassuming companion, had known. He had sensed the insidious growth within her, long before she had any inkling, long before any physical symptoms had manifested themselves. His strange antics, which she had initially dismissed as annoying quirks, had been a desperate, life-saving warning. The diagnosis was early-stage cutaneous lymphoma, a type of cancer affecting the cells of the skin. Because it had been caught so incredibly early, thanks entirely and undeniably to Oliver's inexplicable intuition and remarkable persistence. Her prognosis was excellent. The oncologist, Dr. Lee, a kind woman with reassuring eyes at the Riverbend Cancer Institute, a state-of-the-art facility a 30-minute drive from Willow Creek, outlined a treatment plan involving localized radiation therapy. It would be arduous, she explained, with daily treatments for several weeks, but the chances of a full and complete recovery were very high. "You were incredibly lucky this was found so soon," Mrs. Carter, Dr. Lee had said during their first consultation. "Usually, these types of lymphoma are discovered at a much later stage, when symptoms become more obvious and the cancer is more advanced." Abby had smiled weakly, tears welling in her eyes. "It wasn't luck, doctor," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "It was my cat, Oliver." She recounted the story of Oliver, his peculiar behavior, and his unwavering focus on that one spot on her neck. Dr. Lee listened, fascinated and thoughtful. "I've read research about animals, particularly dogs, detecting cancer," she mused. "Their incredible sense of smell can pick up on volatile organic compounds produced by tumors. It's less documented in cats, but their senses are still far beyond our own in many ways. Who are we to definitively say what they can or cannot perceive? He's quite the hero, your Oliver." The weeks of treatment that followed were challenging. The daily trips to the Cancer Institute, the pervasive fatigue that settled deep in her bones, the strange metallic taste in her mouth from the radiation. It all took a significant toll on her physical and emotional strength. But through it all, Oliver was her steadfast, loyal companion. He seemed to understand implicitly that she wasn't feeling her best. He would curl up beside her on the bed for hours, not demanding attention, not pestering her for treats, just being there, a warm, purring presence that offered silent comfort and unwavering support. The frantic licking and pawing at her neck never returned. It was as if his job, his urgent mission, was done. He had sounded the alarm, and it had finally been heard and acted upon. Her friend Sarah was a rock, driving her to many of her appointments when Abby felt too tired, bringing over comforting casseroles and cheerful, distracting gossip from around Willow Creek. When Abby told her the full story, how Oliver's strange behavior had directly led to the early diagnosis of her cancer. Sarah was stunned into silence for a full minute before exclaiming, "Well, I always said cats were smart, Abby, but that's nothing short of a miracle. You need to buy that cat a lifetime supply of the best salmon money can buy." And Abby did. Oliver was treated to the finest cuts of fresh salmon, gourmet catnip imported from Oregon, and endless praise and affection. But more than the treats, he seemed to bask in the renewed depth of love and appreciation that Abby showered upon him. Their bond, already strong from years of quiet companionship, had deepened into something almost sacred, something profound and unbreakable. He wasn't just her pet anymore. He was her guardian, her little furry savior, the silent hero of her life. Slowly, steadily, Abby recovered. The radiation treatments concluded, and follow-up scans showed that the tumor was gone, with no signs of recurrence. The color returned to her cheeks. Her energy levels gradually increased, and the oppressive weight of fear that had shadowed her for weeks began to lift. Life started to return to its familiar, comforting rhythms. The Keurig still brewed her morning coffee, the flowers in her garden still bloomed in vibrant hues, and the cardinals and blue jays still squabbled merrily at the bird feeder. But nothing was quite the same, because Abby now looked at the world, and particularly at her ginger cat, Oliver, with entirely new eyes. She had always loved Oliver, cherished his companionship, but now her love was intertwined with a profound sense of awe and an overwhelming gratitude that often brought tears to her eyes. How could she have ever doubted him? How could she have been annoyed by his desperate, persistent attempts to save her life? Oliver, for his part, reverted to his old self, mostly. He still napped in sunbeams that patterned the living room carpet, still enjoyed his salmon treats with gusto, still patrolled his domain with quiet dignity. But sometimes, Abby would catch him looking at her with that same intense, knowing gaze she'd seen during those worrying weeks before her diagnosis. And in those moments, she would scoop him up, bury her face in his soft, warm fur, and whisper her thanks, her voice choked with emotion. The story of Abby and Oliver became something of a local legend in Willow Creek. People would stop Abby in Freshfields Market or at the public library, asking about Oliver, marveling at his incredible intuition. Some were skeptical, of course, attributing it all to coincidence, to Abby's heightened awareness perhaps. But Abby knew better. She knew in her heart, with an unshakable certainty, that the insistent taps, the anxious meows, the relentless licking, it wasn't coincidence. It was a message, delivered with a feline urgency she was eternally grateful she had finally, if belatedly, heeded. Life in the cozy ranch-style house on Sycamore Lane continued, peaceful and content. Abby cherished every moment, every purr, every shared glance with the remarkable ginger cat who had, quite literally, sniffed out trouble and nudged her toward safety. In a future she might not have otherwise had, Oliver, blissfully unaware of his hero status, would simply stretch, yawn, and perhaps bat playfully at a dust mote dancing in a sunbeam. A true embodiment of the quiet, extraordinary miracles that sometimes grace our ordinary lives. He reminded her daily that help, and indeed love, can appear in the most unassuming of disguises. He was more than a pet. He was a silent guardian, a furry little angel whose peculiar behavior was the key to Abby's continued story, a future she now embraced with a heart full of gratitude, and a deeper, more profound understanding of the mysterious, wonderful, and often unspoken connections that weave the very fabric of existence.